In this video, let's finally learn how to read music. So if this is knowing how music notation works, and this is actually being able to read music with relative ease, most people get stuck right around here. But don't worry, by the end of this video, you'll have tools to bridge that gap in no time. I've been reading music for over 25 years now, and in the beginning, this was a very difficult thing for me. So over the years, I've developed ways that I look at the score and I decipher this information in a way that makes this a lot easier to remember, and I want to share these with you. I've gathered 5 of my top strategies that will make the biggest difference when it comes to reading any type of score. What I won't be doing in this video is to go over all of the detailed markings and symbols in music notation. If you don't know this information already, go look this up first or get my book, Elements of Music. I have all of that information in there, plus more regarding the fundamentals of music theory. It's really a goal of mine to get all of my viewers up to speed with music theory and the fundamentals, so please do check that out if you haven't already. Number 1, rhythmic divisions. The trick is to get fast at finding the division points in each measure. Let's start by looking at a score. Where should you look first? Well, an initial scan of all of the different points is a good idea, but from there, train your eyes to look for the large beats of each measure. Imagine lines being drawn, like so. This will help you figure out the rest of the rhythm. The point is to start from the easiest point of view and then go from there. You can sort of eyeball where the midpoint is, for example, in each measure. Now I want to give you an example of what this actually looks like when I'm reading through music. So I have some books here that I'm not super familiar with, so we're just going to flip through to find one. So as I'm scanning through, initially I see 2/4, and then it switches to 3/8 and 2/4. So that's something to keep in mind. It looks pretty straightforward. I don't see anything that is super odd, but all of these rests are throwing me off and these cluster type things. And so I'm going to look at what seems the easiest to read, which are the 8th notes in the left hand. We're not going to do allegro agitato. And another tip, if you lean in and you squint, you can definitely read better. Just kidding. Number 2, interval faces. With intervals, think in terms of categories. The trick is to pay attention to the lines and spaces. So if 2 notes are both on lines, they are the same. If they are both on spaces, they are also the same. And if it's a combination of the 2, whether it's line and space or space and line, they are different. It helps to remember that the category of same lines or spaces are odd number intervals. If they are different, they are even number intervals. Once you master this, you can really monkey branch from note to note. If you have a starting point, you can read the notes by intervals. This is particularly useful when you have a lot of ledger lines. To figure out this leap, I'm going to use interval categories. So it goes from a space to a line. So I know it's going to be an even number interval. It looks like it's definitely larger than a 1/6, probably even more than an octave, but not much more than that. So I'm already ruling out different intervals, and I'm gonna make an educated guess and say it's a 10th. Of course, you can sit there and go E, F, G, A, B, but this is a lot faster. And another thing that you get better at is to go backwards. You can kind of look at several notes ahead of you that you're definitely familiar with. So this C sharp, I don't even have to think about, it's a C sharp. And then I see line, line, line. So it must be a 5th above that. So you use a mixture of these different clues. Number 3, tiering. A very important extension on the topic of intervals is to layer your reading and use some notes as reference notes. For example, here we have a G in treble clef that starts off the phrase. I would separate these notes into the following 2 tiers. Instead of reading note by note, keep that G in mind as a reference note. Then use that to help read notes that are close by, such as this A here. So if you just look at the top E, F, E, and back to F, you're only dealing with two different pitches. You can also mind the interval here, but the important thing is that you're combining different types of information. Absolute information, meaning your knowledge of what a note is upon first glance, and relative information, using reference notes and intervals. If you look at the right hand, the F sharp, it goes down a fifth and then it goes up a sixth, but instead of thinking of that, I am thinking F sharp, I'm hanging onto that, and the G is a second above that F sharp. So I'm just looking at those notes in layers so that I'm not hopping from interval to interval. But if I do need to look at the intervals, I'm keeping track of, is it line to space, space to line to line, and eventually you don't even have to think about this. Number 4, key signatures. Key signatures can be tricky because they tell you which accidentals are applied to all of the notes in that area. For sharps, the common trick is to look at the last sharp to the right, and that will be a half step below your major key signature. So in this case, the last sharp is a G sharp, so we are in the key of A major. I like to take this one step further and just call that last sharp the leading tone of the major key signature. Then I play the scale in my head or actually play it on a keyboard. This reinforces to you which notes have sharps on them. For flats, it's much simpler. The second to last flat is the major key. So in this case, the second to last flat is an E flat. So the key signature is E flat major. Again, it helps to hear the scale attached to the key signature once you identify this. So let's read this mazurka here. Key signature, that last sharp is the leading tone of the major key signature. This doesn't mean the key, by the way, it just means the key signature follows that of the E major scale. So it could be in C sharp minor, for example. We will have to figure that out. So as I'm reading, I'm applying the 4 sharps to the corresponding notes, but I'm also relying a little bit on my instinct, which just developed as I played the scale earlier. That allowed me to keep the scale in mind, which automatically contains those sharps. And number 5, clumping. What I like to call clumping is basically looking at a larger pool of notes and information than just reading note by note. Some common ways to clump notes together are to recognize scales, intervals, and chords. I want to emphasize that even if music theory knowledge is not applied, it's still useful to start looking at multiple beats at a time and to identify different points that tie the notes together. Let's read this mazurka here. So immediately this first phrase I see as having similar notes. So here I'm thinking more in terms of chords. Even if I am not identifying what chord this exactly is, I just know that this is of the same category, just by noticing that the notes are similar. And that's enough. It also helps to look forward a little bit, not too much. I know some people that can read measures ahead at a time, but more practically speaking, if you just look within the measure and look at it as a whole rather than note by note, then you kind of know what's to come. So now a quick summary of the 5 strategies I mentioned. Number 1, make rhythmic divisions by scoping out the major beats in each measure. Number 2, use different categories of intervals to read notes relative to one another. Number 3, divide the notes you see within a phrase into different tiers so that you can follow different lines of notes. Number 4, look at the last sharp or second to last flat in the key signature for a shortcut to your key. And number 5, Zoom out and clump notes together to look for unifying elements within each section. If this was a bit too fast for you, or you want to dive deeper into these concepts and more regarding music theory, remember to check out my book, Elements of Music. It goes way more in depth and provides tons of exercises. There will be a special discount upon the release of this video, and the information will be in the description. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon, and I will see you in the next video.